I'm John Seaman, and I'm here at Road America Racetrack in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, with Kerry Kautzer and Robert Ingram. We're covering the Elkhart Lake Vintage Festival. This is the 32nd running of the ELVF. This is the weekend of September 14th to 17th, 2017. The featured marques this weekend will be Porsche and Formula Junior. Porsche cars from various different race eras will be featured, and Formula Juniors are open-wheel race cars. That was a series started in the early 60s to prepare for the Formula One championships. This weekend, the honored guest will be Vic Elford, who raced Porsches in the 60s. Formula Juniors will be celebrating their diamond anniversary this year with a North American Challenge Series. Friday will feature an hour enduro race. On Saturday, there will be qualifying races, the Formula Junior feature race, and the car show Gather on the Green will be Saturday evening. Also featured will be the Aero Reunion, the Plymouth Superbird, the Dodge Daytona, the Ford Talladega, and the Mercury Cyclone. Sunday will feature the Sheldon Cup, Kimberly Cup, and Elkhart Lake Cup. I'm with John Hertzgaard, and he has a car that runs in the Formula Junior class. It's kind of unique in that it has a polished aluminum body on it. John, what's the story on this car?
Well, this car was found in a garage unknown to the owner in 1979 in Duluth, Minnesota. At that time, it was painted green on the tail and the top of the body. After an unfortunate incident here at Turn 5 some years ago, the nose got damaged. So when we stripped the paint off it, we just left it stripped like that. So it's been a lot of fun to run it. It's all built with Austin Healey Bug-Eye Sprite engine, transmission, brakes. So it's got 7-inch drum brakes all the way around. Kind of a unique and maybe handmade one-off car. This car weighs 940 pounds. It's a little bit heavy for the class. And the BMC engines, even in the day, were kind of quickly losing out to the Ford engines. But this car, especially, with the front engine, so it tends to push a little bit more. With small drum brakes, it's not going to stop as fast as the more modern, even the modern Formula Juniors. Yeah.
I'm with Vic Elford, and he is our honored guest here at the VSCDA Vintage Festival. Vic has been racing for quite a few years, and he has a lot of experience with Porsches. Now, Vic, how did you get started in racing?
I started by being a co-driver in rallies, and then eventually I got my own first ever rally car, which was actually a factory car from DKW in Germany. They sent it to England, and for some reason, I have no idea why, decided I would drive it. And that really got me going, because I was doing British rallies, and at one time, at one period in the I won two British rallies, 2 weekends running. I won a British national rally with that car, and that immediately got me to drive in the Triumph factory team. So then I was driving Triumph TR4s in international rallies in Europe, and from there I went to Ford of Britain, and I drove for Ford of Britain, still in rallies, for 3 years. I went to Baron Huschke und Hanstein, who was then the competitions manager at Porsche. And I said, "You've seen what's happening with Ford, Huschke, and I've seen the 911. And I said, I think that car is going to be a winning car. I'd like to drive it." And he saw Vicky, my boy. He always called me Vicky or my boy or both. We don't have a rally budget. We don't have a rally department. And even Ferdinand Piëch does not want that car to go into competition. Can you believe that? Yeah, this was the 911. He was concentrating on his race program with 906, 910s, and which was planned for the future. But eventually von Hanstein said, "Well, I tell you what, we'll lend you one to go to the Tour of Corsica." And so he lent me one to go to Corsica. He said, "No money, no expenses. It's all yours. If you want a practice car, you're going to have to rent it, because we're not going to give you one." I finished third. That was a huge success for Stuttgart. And they said, "Okay, let's go to Monte Carlo." So we went to Monte Carlo, and I led it most of the way. That Monte Carlo was a huge success for Porsche. And in fact, the following year I went back again and won the Monte Carlo Rally. That was in 1968, first time ever for a Porsche. And incredibly, we're just coming up to the 50th anniversary. No British driver has won it since then. Unbelievable. But anyway, that happened then. Then I went on through that year. I didn't have a contract, but we were still going event by event. And I won 3 or 4 major European rallies and the European Championship in the 911. And at that time, Huschke said, "Well, now, Vicky, my boy, have you ever thought about road racing?" And I said, "Yeah, Huschke, I've thought about nothing else since I was about 12 years old." So he said, "Okay, well, we'll start with the Tava Florio." That's it's a little similar to rallying, because it's a long 45 mile in the mountains. So that was my first ever race in a real race car, and I finished third again. And then all the way through that year, I was driving 910s, and I finished third there. I finished third at Nürburgring. I finished fifth overall at Le Mans in a 910. By the end of that year, I had won a major event, the marathon at the Nürburgring, in a 911, a 911R, the R, which was the lightweight one. And the only time to my knowledge a Sportomatic transmission was ever used in an event, and we won with that.
When did you graduate up to the 917?
Well, almost immediately. 1969, we were all due to drive 908s at Le Mans for the 24 hours, except one 917 for Rod Stommelen, which was going to be purely an experimental car. But I'd fallen in love with the car when I first saw it in the Geneva Auto Show that year, and I kept on to Piëch and to Bott, the chief engineers. I said, "I want to drive a 917. I know it's going to be good. We think it's going to break, but you can have one." So I chose Richard Atwood as my co-driver, because I thought he was going to be solid, and he wasn't going to go rushing out and try and prove he was quicker than me or anything like that. And we drove it with kid gloves. Every gear change was like that. And we made it last for 21 hours. And after 21 hours, it did break, but we were leading by 50 miles at that point when it went. By 1970, the car had gone through development. We had the real 917, the short-tailed car. We drove the short-tails everywhere except Le Mans. The only place we drove the long-tails was Le Mans. And even in 1970, There was only one factory longtail in the race, and that was mine, with a 5-litre engine. And with that car at Le Mans, I was the first one to do a lap at Le Mans at over 150 mile an hour average. Porsche had calculated that it would actually do 250 miles an hour flat out on the straight. And in fact, it never quite got there. It got to 245. Not that it really mattered, because it was still 25 miles an hour quicker than anything else in the race. There's a king on the Mulsanne straight at Le Mans, and the king is after you've been running flat out for about 2.5 miles. And after 2 or 3 times in practice, I was saying to myself, this is going to be flat. This has got to be flat out, this corner. There's no problem. And I lift off a little, it was back again. And finally, after 3 or 4 laps, I said, come on, flat. Don't lift the foot. So I just kept my foot flat on the floor and went through the corner flat out. And I came out the other side, and I thought, that was so easy. Why didn't I do it before? By lifting, of course, I changed slightly the aerodynamics of the car. By keeping my foot flat on the floor, I didn't. It just stayed stuck to the ground. And I found later on in the race at night, that year we had a lot of rain through the race, and I found I could drive flat out through that corner at night in the rain, no problem. That's how good the 917.
I'm with Lisa Hansen, and she has a 1969 Porsche 911. Lisa, I know you've been racing at Road America for many years, but give us a little information on the car.
It's a 69 911, 2.2 liter. It was built by Jim Bach and Jeff Syme for Joe Hish, who's been around the racing world a long time. Walt Boren, actually, who was a pro driver, used to drive the car, and he used to race with Fritz. Before I was a race car driver, I used to watch Fritz and Walt mix it up in Fritz's blue car, which is here today, and this car. So I just would watch them, and the opportunity came up to buy the car, and I jumped at that.
So how many years have you had the car?
I've had the car 19 years.
19 years.
Yeah, a long time.
Road America, is this your home track?
It's a home track, yep. I live in Chicago.
Any favorite corners at Road America?
Favorite corners. I like, Turn 5 is always a favorite. And I actually like Turn 8 and Canada Corner. I would say those are my favorite corners.
Now, you run the WeatherTech race in July, and you race here in the fall. What other races do you do through the year?
I just recently went to Mont Tremblant for the first time, which was amazing. That was a bucket list item. Last year I went to Watkins Glen. That was another bucket list, so I'm trying to tick off my list. I've been to VIR a while ago, Mid-Ohio, mostly Midwest, but I'm hoping to get down and do Coda and Sebring and, do some southern races.
How did you first get interested in Porsche?
I used to come up here and watch my dad race. He didn't race Porsches, but I just fell in love with the bathtub Porsches, and so I just really liked all the 911s.
How do you like racing at Road America?
It's my favorite track. It's a big, fast track, and it just has a really nice flow to it, and I just love that. Yeah.
I'm with Roger Herrick, and he is from New Zealand. He is running a Formula Junior. It's a Lola.
It is a 1960 model. First race it ran Boxing Day 1959 at Brands Hatch in England. First Lola single-seater ever made. So chassis number 1, and a pretty special car as a result of that. It had a big history in Europe, ran all the European races, Monza, Monaco, Nürburgring, all of those things in 1960. And then effectively got retired in 63, 64, ended up in the private museum of in the Black Forest in Germany in a loft and forgotten about, and I found it there in 2005, and here it is. So lovely little car, lovely to drive. It's got a Ford 105E engine, which we call a Ford Anglia engine. It's 997cc, so puts out about 100 brake horsepower. And it drives through an Austin Healey Sprite Series 1 gearbox, and then to a Series 1 Austin BMC diff. It's an offset seater, so the engine's canted to one side, and I sit alongside the drive shaft with the gear shift there, and the drum brakes at the rear. One of them is directly behind the seat, so as it warms up you actually feel the heat from the drum brake in your back. Runs drum brakes all around, and it's an independent suspension all around. Interesting, this particular car in mid-1960 was borrowed by Ferrari for development purposes, because the Italian cars of the era in Formula Junior were ladder chassis, and this being Ford-engined and a space frame chassis was beating them up, so they had Stanley Guinea put a Fiat engine in this and ran it back-to-back at Monza, Reims and Nürburgring to find out that the chassis was much superior to the Italian chassis, and then surprisingly the Italian chassis changed to space frame. So it's got a fair bit of history in that regard as well. So there's an international series celebrating the 60th anniversary of Formula Junior, and it's been to various continents. We had it in New Zealand last year, beginning of last year, and we had something like 50 international cars came across and ran up the New Zealand tracks. Then in early part of the year after that, we took these cars to Europe, and we were fortunate enough to run them at Monaco, and this particular car was its third time back at Monaco. It ran there in 60 and in 61, and then I took it back there in 2016. And we ran at Pau, and some of the guys ran at Spa and Goodwood. And this year we're in the US. We've done Laguna Seca, Lime Rock, Watkins Glen, and here we are at Road America. Then we ship the cars back to New Zealand, probably rebuild them after all the thrashing that they've got. And next year we're probably off to the Balkans to race across there, and then the following year to the Far East. So it's pretty exciting, and we're getting a lot of racing miles, and we've got very understanding wives. Luckily this car, both in Europe and here, has been perfect. All I've had to do was fill it up with petrol and put air in the tyres. So it's been very good to me.
When did Lotus bring up the rear engines, which really kind of changed the whole formula?
Well, it was interesting because the very first race that this car ran, which was Boxing Day 1959 at Brands Hatch, that was also, in that particular race, was the very first race of the Lotus 18, which was rear-engined. So this car and the Lotus 18 had their first outing on the same day in Boxing Day, 26th of December 1959. The guy who designed this, Eric Broadley, knew that the rear-engine cars were being designed, but he was convinced that a front-engine car would still be superior. He was right for about 3 months, and then after that it turned out that the rear engine were inherently superior, and he then designed the next version of this, the Mark III, as a rear engine car.
What do you think of Road America?
Well, I've been out once this morning, and it's super fast, and it's pretty scary going to some of those corners at horrendous speeds. I know I can go faster, but whether I have the intestinal fortitude to actually do that, I'm not quite sure. We'll find out. It's certainly quick. And these little things, they are just flat stick wide open. We've been really appreciative of the people over here. They've really looked after us. Everybody's friendly, everybody's helpful, and we just love your country.
Ramo Stott is here, and he's from Kentuck, Iowa, and he has been involved in stock cars since the 50s. Now, when did you first start racing?
Well, after I got out of high school in 54, I took and started a jalopy racing. When I run that short track and won them, it was a 36 Plymouth Coupe, and man, I had it going really good. Racing, which I ran for a couple of years and got the big head and won the championship, and they had a bounty on me even that I was too good, so I thought, well, I'll go starting in the IMCA, which is the International Motor Contest Association out of the Midwest, Omaha, Nebraska. And I tell you what, I ran that for years and years, and most generally I was second to Ernie Durr or Dick Hutchison.
Now, which tracks did that involve?
Well, I didn't miss too many county fairs and state fairs in the state of Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, and Missouri. I'd run something like 80-some races in 1 year. And that kept me pretty busy when I was in my prime of the year, starting in around 1960, when I had my first brand new 1960 Ford convertible that I drove. And then when I went to the ARCA circuit in 1970, with this Superbird, I won the ARCA 300 at Daytona, and it was the first Superbird to win a race. The following week, Pete Hamilton won with Richard Petty's car.
Now, that was the first race that the Superbird had won. How successful was it then the rest of the year?
Real successful. I tell you what, I go to Talladega, which is faster than Daytona. I ran 200. They clocked me with a radar down the back stretch of Talladega at 230 miles an hour. That put up me just a little over 200 for the average 2 and 6 minutes mile track. So this was my fastest race car. If I didn't wreck this car, it was my best, and I never did wreck it. And Doug has been taking good care of it ever since we retired the car from racing.
Who did the mechanic work for you when you raced the Superbird?
Well, it ain't like it is today. I'll tell you what. A race driver today sits back. I tell you what, that's a good question, because I done most all of my own work. Chrysler built this race car for me at Nichols Engineering, but after I went to Daytona and won that race, it was mine to run the rest of the year. I won at Michigan and a few other places with it, even Milwaukee.
Now, Doug is a great caretaker of the car, and he shows it a lot. How did you get to meet Doug?
I heard that he had bought this car. I'd sold it to another guy, and the other guy had sold it to Doug.
Well, I think you've got a wonderful career here. It's sure great to see the car, and it's good to have you here. You having a good time this weekend?
Yes, I sure am. And, you know, like I say, I won probably a little less than 400 races in my career, feature races. And through the times, I felt that I was the best was in late 60s and early 70s when I won a championship for ARCA, won the championship for USAC. And I felt like I was a race driver, and that was my all-time American dream, and I made it. And then, so right now I'm just kind of coasting at 83 years old, and still enjoy just loving every minute of it.
Great.
Other eyes smile tenderly, staring peaceful dreams. I see where the road leads back to you. Now, Georgia, Georgia. No peace do I find, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind.
I'm with George and George Balbach, and we're with the bathtub Porsches, the 356 Porsches. Let's start out with your differentiation between the two. You're the father and the son, and you are known as
George C.
George F.
George F. Ballbach.
Right.
Now, George C., you've been racing Porsches for many years, and here at Road America. When did you start racing Porsche?
We started up here. This was our first track because we're local, more or less. And it was 1989, I believe. In the beginning, we had put together a car over the winter that came from California, and a local shop in Milwaukee worked on it over the winter, and we brought it out in the spring. And we've been racing it ever since.
Now, the 356s, what do they have for engines typically?
Well, they have the flat fours, and our engines are all standard engines. There's no increase in displacement or anything else, but we do clean them up, and we get about as much horsepower as I think you can legally get out of a 356 engine.
Now, George, your car is the same, is it?
Yeah, we all pretty much run the same style motor, and they're all set up through a Curry Engineering, marques cookie, and you know, for the most part, we run them for about 25 hours, get 3-4 races.
Now, the 356, when you compare to other cars of its era, it seems to handle a little bit better. Why is that?
Particularly, they're a little lighter than a lot of the cars of that era. In '58, they came out with the Speedster. Those cars were taken and raced as they were, and that's where the 356 got its strength from.
What's your favorite event?
I enjoy the Hawk. This is certainly a great event. We typically have great weather for it. Go to Road to Atlanta. There's a great event at the Midi. As long as you have a good turnout of 356s, I'm happy.
What's your favorite corner here at Road America?
I think the most dreaded corner is certainly the kink. Yeah. Being here and racing a lot, we've been able to be a little more relaxed than most people in getting through the kink.
5 is my favorite. There's a lot of opportunity to pass there, and that's true. Yeah, coming down into 5 is a lot of fun.
The next time we'll race will be in Circuit of the Americas in Austin in another month or so.
Good. I'm with Robert Hemke, and he has one of the rear-engine Formula Junior cars. Could you give us information on the car?
This is a 1962 Cooper T59, built in England, 1100cc Ford Cosworth with a Hewland gearbox, 5-speed. I bought it in 1996 and have had a long time. We've raced it a lot, so it's been actively raced for the last 28 years. Every year on the track somewhere. So.
Now you're participating in the North American Formula Junior Challenge. What races have you done so far?
We've done Indy, Mosport, Mid-Ohio, Laguna Seca, Lime Rock, Watkins Glen, and this Elkhart Lake event is the last one in the tour.
And you've made every one of them so far?
So far, everything's good.
Now, the rear-engine Formula Juniors certainly have kind of taken over the series from the front engines. That because they're a little better weight distribution and handling?
Well, I just think the whole design of this was the stepping stone to go into Formula One. You raced Formula Junior, then you went to Formula One. So there used to be front engine Formula One cars too. So as the Formula One series progressed, the Formula Junior series progressed, and 1963 is pretty much the end of it. Yeah. So they're pretty quick little cars. This is definitely my favorite track out of all the tracks in the United States. So it is fast. It's just beautiful atmosphere, great people every time we come. I've done this 11 times.
I'm with Fritz Siddell. This is a 1967 911S, and it has quite a bit of history. Can you tell us about the car?
I acquired the car probably 10 years ago from a good friend of mine, David Mixon. It turned out that when I brought the car, it was still in an RSR form, which had wide body fenders on it and a bigger motor in it and a different trans. But after a little research that David had done, we found out that this actually was a history car that actually was raced back in 1967 by Alan Johnson and Roger Bursch. The car was bought out of Jacksonville, Florida, the famous Brumos store. They quickly converted the car so that they could race it. They took it to Daytona, won their class in C production that year. They also went to Sebring, won their class 9th overall the same year in 1967. Roger and Alan lived in San Diego area, I think it was. So they took the car, once done from those two races, back out to California and proceeded to win the SCCA championship with it in C production for 67. The car did get sold to various other people down the road, going well into the 80s with racing history and being modified. Every consecutive years, these cars got faster, bigger motors, bigger wheels, bigger flares, and so the car was sitting a little disguised, and we were able to figure out what the car was, and we've brought it back to its original state, which is a narrow body, short wheelbase 911S. This thing's been racing up at Road America for quite a few years, well over 20 or 30 years. Back part of the track is phenomenal. I've got a lot of years in here and probably have a few thousand laps here. It's a lot of fun having this in our backyard.
Up front for the lead here in the Sheldon Cup. cup races were done so that drivers of sometimes different groups that don't normally get to race with each other can, because we do it strictly based on time, nothing else. So it's usually very, very close competition because there's a small window that the drivers have to meet. Well, of course, the Elkhart Lake Cup just kind of is wide open, I guess. So but the first two groups have to meet a small window in order to do that, and that means the first few finishers are probably well within less than 1 second of lap times to each other. So it's usually very spirited racing. The Kimberly Cup, which was named after Jim Kimberly, is I'll call it our smaller displacement. Arash Nadershani. You've come a long ways. You're from Bellevue, Washington. Congratulations on the win. His name was Maynard Sheldon, and he and Freddie Wacker and I think Jim Kimberly were the ones that flew over the region here and decided that Elkhart Lake looked like a pretty cool place to have a race, and they talked the right political people into okaying it, and the rest truly is history. The winner for the Sheldon Cup, and Fritz Seidel
had a great outing with Curry Engineering that helped prep a bunch of these Porsches that got brought up here. And I wanted to say thank you very much for coming out to visit us here in Wisconsin, Vic, because I mean, this is truly an honor to have someone of your stature, visiting our little track here in northern Wisconsin.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure for me to be here. Thank you.
The third cup race is the Elkhart Lake Cup, which back in the day was basically run what you brung. It encompassed all the really fast big iron like the Cunninghams and things like that. The winner today is Adam Rupp. Him and his dad have run here for a very long time, and I think this is probably a first timer for you, isn't it? It is, okay.
A special thanks to our crew for making every session and keeping it running. And it's a great car. This is always my favorite event. VSCD and Road America do a great job. The weather's always good and the track time's always good. So special thanks to VSCD and Road America as well.
Thank obviously everybody that was here, all the competitors and the spectators. Hopefully everybody had a very good time, and we did the best we could with the weather. And I don't think it got much better than that.
Thank you.